The envelope was ivory, thick, and heavy in a way that felt intentional. My name, Amara Lane, was scrawled in deep gold calligraphy on the front. No return address, no explanation. Just that. I found it in my mailbox one quiet Tuesday morning in November, tucked between a utility bill and a coupon flyer. For a moment, I thought it might be from a client. Maybe a holiday card, maybe even something from Leia's school. But then I saw the seal on the back, an embossed rose wrapped in a ribbon, and my stomach dropped before I even broke the wax. I didn't have to open it to know. Still I did. Slowly, deliberately, like peeling the lid off a box you've buried deep underground for years. Inside was a single invitation. You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Madison Hale and Daniel Grayson. December 3rd at the Rosebridge Conservatory. I read it once, then again, and again. The name hit like a brick to the chest. Daniel Grayson. My Daniel. My ghost. I hadn't seen him in 3 years, not since the night he disappeared from our apartment without a goodbye. One moment he was sitting next to me, holding my hand as we stared at the ultrasound photo of the baby we'd lost. The next morning he was gone. No calls, no explanations, just a single note. I can't do this anymore. I need to feel alive again. As if grieving had made me dead. As if I hadn't just watched our future bleed out on a hospital floor. But he hadn't just left me. He'd left Leia too. She wasn't mine. Not by blood. Leia was his daughter from a previous marriage. Her mother had left when she was 4. And when Daniel and I moved in together, Leia came with him, quiet, wide-eyed, and uncertain. But the moment she wrapped her small hand around my finger and whispered, "Can I call you Mommy?" something inside me shifted forever. I stopped being just someone who loved a man. I became someone who loved his child. Fiercely. Completely. As my own. So when Daniel left, Leia stayed. Not by accident. By choice. She was 11. She stood in the doorway holding her tiny suitcase and said, "I want to stay with you." I didn't ask why. I just knelt down and pulled her into my arms and promised her I wouldn't leave, even if he did. And I kept that promise. Even when I had no idea how we'd pay rent. Even when I couldn't afford groceries and got calls from debt collectors daily. Even when I stared into my reflection and didn't recognize the woman looking back. I braided her hair. I packed her lunches. I helped her with homework while hiding the stack of overdue bills under the placemats. And on the nights when I could barely breathe from the weight of being left behind, she knocked on the bathroom door, crawled in beside me, and said, "I made you a sandwich. You forgot to eat." There were days I felt like a ghost floating through my own life. Days I wished I could dissolve into the silence. But she kept me anchored, one peanut butter sandwich at a time. So now, standing in my kitchen with that ivory envelope in my hand, I didn't feel shock. I felt something slower, colder, a kind of nausea that started deep in my gut and worked its way up into my throat. Who sends a wedding invitation to the woman you abandoned? Who decides that out of all the things to say after 3 years of silence, this is the way to reappear? I almost threw it out. I should have, but I didn't. Instead, I left it on the counter, untouched for 3 days. Every time I passed it, it whispered to me. A reminder, a taunt, a challenge. And then, one evening, Leia found it. She was 16 now, taller than me, quieter, with eyes that saw through everything. She picked it up, read it aloud without blinking, and looked at me. "You should go," she said. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Why would I put myself through that? So I can see him start his new life with someone younger, prettier, wealthier. "No," she said softly. "So he sees what he lost." That made me stop. She wasn't talking about him. Not really. She was talking about me. The me I used to be. The me I had forgotten. The me that still hurt quietly and still showed up anyway. And maybe it was time he saw her, too. The week after Daniel left, the silence in our apartment was unbearable. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that hums like an engine beneath the floor, a silence you can't turn off. It clung to the walls, to the bed sheets, to the inside of my mouth. Every breath I took felt like a reminder that the life I'd built wasn't real anymore, just a leftover echo in a space too large for one person to fill. But I wasn't alone. Leia was still there, small, quiet, and too perceptive for her age. She didn't ask where her father had gone. She just watched me, watched how I moved slower, how my eyes stayed red longer, how my voice trembled when I said goodnight. And then one night, when the electricity was off because I forgot to pay the bill, I found her in the kitchen lighting candles and cutting an apple in half. She smiled and said, "Let's pretend we're camping." I almost broke. We survived on peanut butter, tap water, and the memory of stability. I took freelance jobs wherever I could, websites for small businesses, poster designs, social media ads, anything. There were nights I stayed up until 3 a.m. fixing client logos, then woke up at 6 to make Leia breakfast and walk her to school. I told myself this was temporary, that I just needed time. But time moved like molasses when you're grieving and broke. Some mornings, I would forget to brush my hair. Other days, I wore the same shirt for 3 days straight because laundry soap was low on the priority list. I stopped answering texts. I stopped picking up calls unless the number was unfamiliar. Even then, 9 times out of 10, it was a debt collector reminding me that Daniel had taken the savings account when he left. All of it. I remember one evening, sitting on the bathroom floor with the water running. Not because I was showering, but because I didn't want Leia to hear me cry. My body shook, so hard I thought I might shatter. My chest burned. My arms were numb. The grief didn't come in sobs anymore. It came in waves of paralysis, like being underwater with no air in sight. Then a knock. Leia opened the door slowly, careful not to scare me. She was 10. Barely up to my ribs. She sat down beside me with a paper plate in her hands. On it was a peanut butter sandwich, cut in half. "You forgot to eat," she said, placing it gently in my lap. I don't know what broke me more, the kindness or the fact that she noticed. I pulled her into me and held her tighter than I ever had. In that moment, I realized she wasn't just surviving with me. She was holding me together. After that night, I started therapy. I found a counselor who specialized in grief and abandonment. The sessions were hard, ugly even, but I showed up, week after week. I stopped lying to myself about being okay. I told the truth, that I was angry, that I was tired, that I was ashamed of how broken I felt. And little by little, the weight started to lift, not all at once, but enough to breathe. I downsized. We moved into a smaller apartment near Leia's school. I painted the walls soft green, bought secondhand furniture, and taped her art to the fridge. I got a used car that stalled in the cold but ran well enough. I said yes to more clients. I charged higher rates. I set boundaries. I laughed again. Real laughter, not the kind that stings when it ends. And through it all, Leia never wavered. She learned how to make pasta. She reminded me to take breaks. She told me when a client was being unfair and not to let them steamroll your worth. She stood beside me not just as a child, but as a witness to my rebuilding. And in doing so, she helped rebuild me too. We didn't talk about Daniel much. Sometimes his name would slip out during a story, a memory, a mention of an old restaurant we used to go to, but mostly he faded, the way a person does when they choose absence over effort. The way silence becomes a language in itself. And yet, I kept the ultrasound photo, tucked deep inside my desk drawer, wrapped in an old scarf. I couldn't look at it, but I couldn't throw it away either. Because even if the future I imagined had been erased, some part of it still lived in the choices I made every day. We survived. We adapted. We grew. And then, one day, without warning, came the envelope, the golden letters, the wedding. And I realized this wasn't the end of the story. It was the middle. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter for a full week before I touched it again. Every time I walked past it, I felt a tightening in my chest, like my lungs were trying to close in on themselves. Some nights I'd catch myself just staring at it, wondering who had really sent it. Was it Madison? Daniel? Some petty friend of his who thought pain made for a good punchline? I never found out, but deep down I knew what it was. A message, not an invitation. A message to remind me that I'd been replaced, that he'd found happiness without me, that I was disposable. I told myself I wouldn't go, that I had nothing to prove, that I'd already healed, or at least healed enough. But the truth was, healing doesn't always come in silence. Sometimes it demands confrontation. Sometimes it asks you to sit in the fire without burning. I left the envelope untouched until one night, Leah came home from school and saw it still sitting there. She didn't say anything at first, just walked past, set her backpack down, and opened the fridge. But a few minutes later, as she stirred leftover soup on the stove, she finally asked, "Are you going?" I didn't answer. Not right away. I was wiping down the kitchen counter, pretending to be busy. To what? She didn't flinch. The wedding. My fingers tightened around the sponge. "It's not a wedding," I muttered. "It's a performance." "So," she said, ladling soup into 2 bowls, "that doesn't mean you shouldn't be there." I turned to her, surprised by the calm in her voice. Why would I want to see him marry someone else? After what he did, after everything. Leah set the bowls on the table and sat across from me. "Because it's not about him." I scoffed. "Then what is it about?" "It's about you," she said. "Showing up, taking up space, not hiding anymore." I stared at her, 16 years old, wise beyond anything I'd ever been at her age. She didn't blink, didn't smile. She just looked at me like she'd already decided something, and I was the one who needed to catch up. And maybe she was right. For 3 years, I'd been shrinking myself, quieting my grief, smiling just enough so people wouldn't ask questions. I'd learned how to survive in the cracks, but I'd forgotten how to stand tall in the light. Maybe this was my chance to do that, not for Daniel, not for Madison, not for revenge, but for the woman I used to be, the one who loved fearlessly, who braided a little girl's hair every morning while the world fell apart. "Okay," I said quietly. "I'll go." Leah nodded, as if she'd known I would. "I already picked out your dress." I blinked. "You what?" She grinned, the first real grin in days. "I borrowed it from Aunt Mel. Navy blue. Classy. Makes your eyes look sharp." I laughed. A small, uncertain laugh, but a real one. "You're bossy." She shrugged. "I've had a good teacher." I should have known she'd planned this. Leah had always been the quiet kind of observant, the kind that noticed cracks and smiles and meaning behind silences. She wasn't just encouraging me to go. She was preparing me for it. Like she knew that this wasn't just a wedding. It was a reckoning. Uncle Malcolm, of course, agreed to drive us. He didn't ask many questions, he never did, but when I told him, his jaw tightened just slightly. "He's still a jackass then," he muttered. I didn't argue. The morning of the wedding, I stood in front of the mirror for nearly 20 minutes before putting on the dress. It was simple, but elegant, navy knee-length with sleeves that hugged just right. I hadn't worn heels in almost a year, but I slipped them on anyway. They made me feel taller, grounded, like I could face anything, even if I trembled the whole time. In the hallway, Leah wore her catering uniform. Black slacks, crisp white shirt, hair tied back. She looked like a professional, but when she saw me, her face softened. "You look strong." I smiled. "I feel terrified." "Same thing," she said, handing me my coat. We didn't speak much in the car. The conservatory was 40 minutes away, nestled on the edge of a frozen lake. As we pulled up, the glass roof shimmered under the pale winter sun. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. Like a fairy tale, desperately trying to convince itself it was real. I stepped out slowly, heels clicking on the stone driveway. Uncle Malcolm gave my shoulder a firm squeeze. "You're doing great," he said before heading off to park. Leah gave me a look that said everything, "Don't flinch." And I didn't. Not even when I saw Daniel through the window, laughing beside a woman with golden hair and a dress that sparkled like it belonged in a bridal magazine. Not even when every part of me whispered to turn around, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't here for him. I was here for me. The Rosebridge Conservatory looked like something out of a magazine. Glass ceilings arching above imported orchids, candles floating in crystal bowls, a live string quartet playing soft classical pieces in the corner. The kind of place built to impress or to distract. I walked slowly through the lobby, each step sinking a little deeper into plush carpet as the murmurs of guests swirled around me. People in designer suits and glittering heels, laughter that sounded just a bit too bright, and that polished, practiced hospitality that comes when people are trying too hard to look like they belong. I saw Daniel before he saw me. He stood near the bar, wearing a tailored black tuxedo and his signature smirk, the one he always wore when he was charming a crowd. That smirk used to be magnetic. Now it felt like an act I'd already seen too many times, one I'd stopped applauding long ago. Then I saw her, Madison Hale. White silk hugged her frame like she'd been poured into it. Her hair was spun gold, cascading in perfect waves over her shoulders. She was laughing, loudly, too loudly, at something someone had said, clutching Daniel's arm like a trophy. Every movement felt rehearsed. Every smile too sharp, too white. She looked like she belonged in a bridal catalog, or maybe just on stage. Leia had already vanished into the catering prep area. She hadn't said much on the way in, just gave me a wink and disappeared through the staff entrance like she belonged there. She'd insisted it was just a job, but I knew her better. She wasn't here to serve hors d'oeuvres. She was here to protect me in the quiet, fierce way she always had. Uncle Malcolm was seated near the back, just where we agreed. When he saw me enter, he gave a small nod. That was all I needed. A silent, grounding presence that said, "You're doing fine, even if it feels like hell." I slipped into the chair beside him and folded my hands tightly in my lap. My fingers wouldn't stop moving. I stared at the chandelier, the floral centerpieces, the embroidered tablecloths. Anything but the altar. But eventually I had to look. The ceremony began. The music swelled. The guests rose. And then Madison walked down the aisle like she owned the air itself. She beamed at Daniel with such theatrical devotion that it made my stomach twist. He didn't flinch. He didn't stumble. He recited his vows like he was reading from a teleprompter. Smooth, rehearsed, sterile. I didn't cry. I didn't blink. I just bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste blood, because for all the years I spent picking up the pieces of his life, I wasn't even a footnote in this one. The applause was loud. The kiss was dramatic. The photographers snapped a dozen shots in rapid succession. I felt like I was watching someone else's movie, the kind you already know the ending to, but you can't look away. Then came the reception. Waiters flowed like choreography. Champagne flutes clinked. Laughter echoed across the marble floors. I sipped water. Quiet. Still. Trying to make my body small enough to disappear. Leia passed by once, carrying a tray of bruschetta. Our eyes met. She didn't smile. She winked. That was enough. Then came the toasts. The best man went first, talking about Daniel's resilience, his loyalty, his sense of humor. I almost laughed. Almost. The maid of honor followed, gushing about Madison's heart, her kindness, her unwavering grace. And then Madison herself stood up, holding her glass high, and everything changed. "I want to say something," she said, her voice sparkling like her earrings. When I met Daniel, he was healing. He'd been through something painful. Someone had hurt him, damaged him, left him with scars. But I saw the real him, the man he could be if he was loved right. People chuckled softly. A few nodded. I felt my hands go cold. "He was broken when I found him," she continued, a smile tugging at her lips. "But I saved him. I healed him. And now he's finally whole." It was subtle, just a shift in the air. But I felt it. like the moment before a storm breaks, like the hush before lightning splits the sky. Every part of me was screaming, stand up, say something, throw your glass. But I didn't move, because the moment wasn't mine. It was hers. From the corner of my eye, I saw it, movement near the kitchen. One of the waitresses had stopped walking. Her jaw was tight, her fists clenched, and then she stepped forward toward the center of the room. Slowly, like she was walking through water. Leia. She removed her cap, held it in one hand, and raised her voice loud enough to slice through every clink of crystal and polished laugh in the room. "I'm his daughter," she said, "and I have something to say." Every sound in the ballroom stopped. Forks froze midair. Laughter turned into stunned silence. People turned in their seats, necks craning toward the young girl in the black apron and white button-up shirt now standing alone beside the dance floor. Leia's hands were steady, but her chest rose and fell like she was pulling breath from somewhere deeper than her lungs. Her curls had loosened from the bun she pinned that morning. Her eyes, sharp, brown, unflinching, were locked on the bride. "I'm his daughter," she said again, louder this time. "From before you. From before he pretended we didn't exist." Madison's smile didn't fall. It shattered. I watched it break apart across her face like thin porcelain. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Just silence. Pure, sharp silence. Daniel turned in his chair. Slow, mechanical. His face was pale, slack. He looked at Leia like a stranger had walked in wearing his past. "She's not just the woman you mocked," Leia said, voice cracking slightly. "She's the woman who raised me." A gasp rippled through the room. Someone near the front covered their mouth. A waiter froze, tray hovering in midair. "I was 11 when he left," Leia continued. "He didn't just leave her. He left me. No calls, no letters, no goodbye. Just gone." She turned to the crowd. "But you all cheered when she called her broken, when she said she saved him. Like none of you stopped to ask what that meant." Her eyes locked onto Madison. "Did you ever ask him about me? About the kid he left behind? Or did you just like the version of the story where he was the victim?" Madison blinked rapidly, her lips parting, but still no words. "I watched her cry in the bathroom at night, so I wouldn't see," Leia said, her voice rising. "I watched her skip meals to buy me shoes. I watched her rebuild both our lives from nothing while he pretended we didn't exist." Daniel stood up. "Leia, not here." "Oh," she said, sharp and bitter. "Now you remember my name?" He took a step toward her, but she didn't back down. "When I sent birthday cards, they came back unopened. When I emailed you, I got no reply. Not even a block. Just ignored." She pointed toward me. "And now you let someone stand in front of a room and call her trash." He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something crack. Not just guilt, not just fear, but recognition of what he'd done, of who he'd left. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. "She didn't break you," Leia said, turning back toward the room. "You broke yourself, and then you buried us." The silence was thunderous. Madison finally found her voice. This is crazy. She's trying to ruin our wedding." "You ruined it," Leia said, cool and even, "the second you built it on a lie." Then she turned toward me, hand outstretched. I stood. I didn't even think. My fingers reached for hers like they always had. Familiar, steady. In that simple gesture, something in me that had been dormant for years began to stir. Not rage, not bitterness, power. "She didn't come here to fight," Leia said to the crowd. "She came because I asked her to, because I wanted her to see that she doesn't have to hide anymore." She looked at Madison again, straight into her soul. "She doesn't need an invitation to belong in any room. She belongs because she survived it, and no one gets to rewrite our story to make themselves look better. The ballroom held its breath. Madison clutched her champagne glass with trembling fingers. Blinking like a camera flash had gone off in her eyes. And then, in a voice that barely held itself together, she said, "This is my wedding. You can't just hijack it." Leia tilted her head. "Then maybe next time, don't marry a man with ghosts you refuse to see." We turned, and the crowd parted. No one stopped us. No one dared. Behind me, I heard Daniel's voice once more, quiet, desperate. "Leia," but she didn't turn. She just held my hand tighter and walked on, leaving the weight of every lie behind her. We hadn't made it halfway down the corridor when a voice snapped behind us, sharp, high-pitched, and cracking under its own weight. "Wait!" We stopped. It was Madison. She came stumbling out of the ballroom like someone chasing a dropped lie, her dress swishing around her legs like tangled netting. Her perfect curls bounced with each uneven step, but the perfection ended there. Her face, once luminous and polished, was now smeared with mascara and blotchy from heat. Her hands trembled as she pointed at us. "You can't just do that," she said, breathless. "You can't just hijack my wedding and humiliate us." Leia turned first. "Calm. Steady. Us." Madison blinked. "You could have handled this privately." "No," I said, stepping forward before Leia could. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "You could have handled it privately. But instead, you stood in a room full of strangers and called me broken, as if I was a cautionary tale you'd triumphed over." She looked at me like I'd slapped her. "I didn't know," she said, weaker now. "I didn't know he had a daughter." "Did you ask?" Leia's voice was like glass, thin, sharp, and unshakable. "Or did you just like the version where you were the savior?" Madison opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Then Daniel appeared behind her. His tie was undone, his jacket unbuttoned. He looked different, not composed, not confident, just exposed. The mask had fallen, and underneath was a man who had run too far and finally ran out of road. "Leia," he said again, this time softer, "I never meant for this to happen." She turned to him slowly, her shoulders squared, chin high. "Which part?" she asked. "Me being born? You abandoning me? Or standing there while someone else tried to erase everything I am?" He flinched. "I thought I was protecting you." "By disappearing," she snapped. "You didn't protect me. You erased me." Then he looked at me. For the first time since we'd arrived, his eyes finally found mine. I was broken, Amara," he said quietly. "You know I was." I didn't deny it. "I was too," I said. "But I didn't leave." The air changed between us. The tension didn't spike, it settled. The truth had been laid down so simply, so cleanly, that it didn't need decoration. There was no argument left to make, no way to spin it. He ran. I stayed. "I can't take it back," he whispered. "No," I replied, "you can't." Then Leia spoke again, but this time her voice softened. "You know what I used to tell myself," she said, stepping closer. "That maybe something happened to you. That maybe you died. Because it was easier to imagine you were gone than to believe you were alive and just didn't care." Daniel's face crumpled. His mouth opened, closed. He looked down at his shoes, the floor, the trail of his choices. But what came next none of us expected. Leia stepped closer again. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She looked him in the eye and said, "I forgive you." His head shot up. You do." "Not for you," she said. "For me. Because carrying your absence has been exhausting. And I'm done." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "You're incredible, you know that?" She turned slightly, pointing at me. "I know. She made me that way." And in that moment a new silence fell, not heavy like shame, but still like peace, like something sacred had just been named aloud. Madison stood off to the side, arms folded, eyes darting. "So what now? You just walk away and pretend none of this happened?" Leia tilted her head. "No, We walk away and let you sit in what you built." And I added, "If you wanted a perfect story, you should have picked someone with nothing to hide." Neither of them said another word. We turned, walked toward the exit. Outside, the sky had begun to drizzle, a soft, silver rain that painted the sidewalks like watercolor. But we didn't run for cover. The storm we just walked through wasn't falling from the sky. It had already passed. Uncle Malcolm was waiting by the car. He didn't ask questions. He just looked at Daniel, still standing in the entryway, and gave us a slow, proud nod. "Well," he muttered as we opened the door, "guess that's what you'd call a mic drop." Leah laughed. I laughed with her. Not bitter, not forced. Real. For the first time in a long time, real. We didn't speak much on the drive home. The rain tapped gently against the car windows, a soft percussion that filled the silence with something almost comforting. Leah leaned her head against the glass, watching the blur of headlights and empty streets pass us by. I sat beside her, hands folded in my lap, feeling light. Not happy, not relieved, just light, because for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't carrying the weight alone. When we got home, Leah headed straight for the shower. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the faint ring on the counter where that ivory envelope used to sit. The invitation was long gone, but its echo still lingered, not as a wound, but as a marker of where something had ended and something else had begun. The next morning, the world began to catch up. It didn't happen in headlines. It didn't make the papers, but it was everywhere, quietly, discreetly, unstoppably. Grainy phone videos started popping up online. One labeled, "Waitress shuts down bride's insult with epic speech." Another, "Bride gets humbled at own wedding." There was no audio in some clips, but you didn't need it. You could see the fear in Madison's face, the stillness in Daniel's, the fire in Leah's, and the woman in the navy blue dress standing silently beside her. Me. I didn't post them. I didn't need to. The truth has a funny way of traveling on its own. People messaged me, friends I hadn't heard from in years. Some apologized for losing touch after Daniel left. Others just said, "You were so brave." But I didn't feel brave. Not at the wedding. Not when Madison mocked me. And not even when Leah stood up and shattered the script. I felt like someone who had finally stopped trying to disappear. I never heard from Daniel again. No follow-up call. No letter. No long-winded attempt to explain himself. And honestly, I don't think he had anything left to say. His story had already been written. Not in the vows he recited, not in the lies he told, but in the silence that followed his departure. That was his chapter, and we were done reading it. As for Madison, her name made the rounds in gossip circles for a few weeks. Enough to bruise. Enough to remind her that pretending someone doesn't exist doesn't erase them. It just postpones the reckoning. I heard from someone at the venue that she left the reception early. Said she wasn't feeling well. But I know better. The truth doesn't just hurt. It lingers. It settles in your bones. And when spoken clearly, it echoes. A month later, Leah showed me a podcast teaser. Madison's voice. For girls who think they don't have a voice. The irony made me laugh. Leah just shook her head. "Let her talk," she said. "Everyone saw the video. They know the real story." And she was right. But what stayed with me, what mattered more than viral clips or whispered rumors, was something that happened on a completely ordinary Tuesday night. I was doing the dishes. Leah was sitting at the kitchen counter, flipping through her notebook, her legs swinging off the stool like she had when she was younger. There was music playing softly from my phone. Some old jazz, track we both liked but never remembered the name of. And then out of nowhere she said, "I used to wish my real mom had stayed." I froze, my hand still in the soapy water. My heart clenched. "But now I get it," she continued, voice softer. "Maybe she had to go so I could find you." I didn't say anything right away. I couldn't, because that was it. The moment. The one I didn't know I'd been waiting for. Not applause. Not revenge. Not an apology. Just this. A kitchen. A daughter. A truth. I dried my hands. Sat beside her. Rested my forehead gently against hers. You saved me, I whispered. No, she said. You saved us. And in that moment, I understood something that had taken me years to name. That the strongest love stories aren't always romantic. Some are built in silence, in healing, in showing up when it's hard. Some are born the moment a child chooses to protect the person who never stopped protecting them. And that's what we had. A story built not on vows, but on survival. Winter melted into spring. The snow outside our windows began to recede, slowly revealing patches of earth beneath. Leia started hanging her coat on the lower hook by the door again. I switched out our cinnamon candles for citrus. Life didn't change all at once, but it moved. Quietly, steadily, like breath returning to lungs that had forgotten how to inhale without shuddering. I started writing again. Not for work, not for clients, just for me. I opened a blank document one morning and typed out the words I hadn't been able to say out loud for years. I was left. But I am not what was left behind. It wasn't a memoir or a blog. It was more like a letter to anyone who had ever been silenced by someone else's story. I posted a short essay on a local women's platform. Nothing dramatic, just honesty, about being left, about being invisible, about coming back to yourself, one tiny act at a time. To my surprise, people responded. Not in thousands, but enough. Enough women who said, me too. Enough who said, I thought I was the only one. And that was more than enough. One woman sent me a photo of her kitchen table covered in bills and a peanut butter sandwich. Your daughter reminded me of mine, she wrote. She fed me when I didn't have the strength to feed myself. I printed that photo, framed it, put it above my desk, because healing doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like survival with buttered bread. We still didn't talk about Daniel much. Sometimes his name would slip out in stories. Sometimes Leia would ask about a song he used to play, but mostly he faded, not because we pushed him out, but because we no longer needed to carry the shape of his absence in our daily breath. And Madison? She eventually launched her podcast. I listened to one episode, just one. She talked about reclaiming narratives and choosing joy. I didn't feel anger. I didn't roll my eyes. I just closed the app. Some people need to perform closure. Others just live it. One evening, Leia and I were out walking. Something we'd started doing together on Sundays, no phones, no distractions. She was talking about college applications, about maybe majoring in psychology. I asked why, and she said, I think I want to help people feel seen, like you did for me. I stopped, turned to her. You make me proud every day, I said. She smiled without looking at me. I know. And she did. That night, as we walked home, the sky was wide above us, dark but not heavy. The stars came out slowly, blinking into view like they'd been waiting for an audience. Leia reached for my hand and didn't let go. She didn't need to. I wasn't walking ahead anymore, and she wasn't walking behind. We were walking side by side. Later, as I curled into bed, I thought about how easy it would have been to let that wedding rewrite our history, to let a single woman's speech define who I had been. But truth doesn't belong to the loudest person in the room. It belongs to the one who keeps showing up. If you're listening to this now, if you've ever been the one who got left, overlooked, or erased, know this. You are not broken because someone walked away. You are not worthless because someone couldn't recognize your worth. You're still here, and that's everything. Because strength doesn't always look like a comeback speech or a viral moment. Sometimes it looks like making lunch for a child you didn't give birth to, and hearing her, years later, call you mom. Sometimes it looks like walking into a room where no one wanted you and leaving as the only one who told the truth. And sometimes it looks like choosing silence, not because you're afraid to speak, but because your story already speaks for itself. That is how we ended. Not with applause, not with revenge, just with truth and love, and the kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore, only heals. It was supposed to be a new beginning, but instead it became the morning my world collapsed. I still remember the sharp sting of the cold Boston air sneaking through the cracks of our small apartment, the soft cries of my newborn twins filling the space, and the heavy silence that clung to everything like a funeral shroud. I had just finished feeding them, cradling their tiny bodies close to my chest, when I heard the front door creak open. My heart leapt with hope. Maybe Ethan had returned to start the life he had promised us. Maybe the man I loved hadn't changed as much as I feared. I turned with a smile, only for it to freeze on my lips. Ethan stood there, framed by the doorway, his face pale and hollow, his eyes distant as if he were looking at something, or someone, far beyond me. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and the sight sent a chill spiraling down my spine. Something was wrong. I set the babies gently back into their crib, my hands trembling slightly as I tucked the soft blanket around them. "Ethan?" I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of dread. He didn't answer at first. He just stared at the floor, breathing heavily, like he was preparing for a battle he knew he would lose. Finally, he looked up and I saw it, the decision already carved into his features. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and broken. I felt the ground shift beneath me, but I nodded numbly, urging him to continue, even though every cell in my body screamed for him to stay silent. Ethan took a long, shuddering breath, then forced the words out like they were razors on his tongue. "I can't do this anymore. I have to leave." For a moment, I couldn't process what he had said. I blinked at him, confused, as if hearing a language I didn't understand. "Leave?" I echoed, barely a whisper. "What do you mean, leave?" He shifted his weight from foot to foot, his gaze darting anywhere but at me. "My mother, she was right. You and I, we don't belong in the same world." I thought I could fight it, but I can't. The room seemed to tilt, and I had to grip the side of the crib to steady myself. The babies stirred at the sudden tension, their tiny faces crumpling as if sensing the devastation unfolding around them. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. "Not yet. You're leaving me?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Leaving your own children?" Ethan's face contorted with something like guilt, but he said nothing. His silence was more damning than any confession. In that moment, I realized the truth. The man I had loved, the man who once promised to stand by me through everything, was already gone. What stood before me now was a stranger, a coward, a puppet still tethered to the woman who had hated me from the start. He turned to leave, his hand resting on the doorknob for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, and then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, the final nail in the coffin of our life together. I stood there, motionless, as the soft whimpers of my twins grew louder, their cries slicing through the suffocating silence. I crumpled to the floor, burying my face in my hands, and for the first time since the nightmare had begun, I allowed myself to break. The sobs tore out of me, raw and uncontrollable, shaking my entire body. I cried for the love that had died, for the promises shattered, for the future stolen from me. But most of all, I cried for my children who would grow up without a father's love, not because of some unavoidable tragedy, but because he had chosen to abandon them. The morning light streamed weakly through the dirty window, casting long, cold shadows across the room. Somewhere deep inside me, a small voice whispered that this was only the beginning, and the hardest part was still to come. If you had asked me back then, I would have said it was fate. I met Ethan Caldwell on a crisp October afternoon, when the golden leaves of Boston's public garden swirled around my feet and the world felt wide open and full of promise. I had just moved to the city, fresh out of college, armed with little more than a degree in interior design and dreams too big for my tiny savings account. I was rushing to a job interview, balancing a coffee and a portfolio under my arm, when a gust of wind knocked my papers loose and sent them flying across the sidewalk. And that's when Ethan appeared. He helped me gather the scattered drawings, his warm smile and steady hands calming the chaos I felt inside. His eyes were a striking shade of deep blue, and when he looked at me, it was as if he truly saw me, not just the nervous young woman scrambling after her future. We ended up talking for hours at a small cafe tucked between rows of brownstones, the city fading around us as laughter and easy conversation filled the space between us. At the time, I had no idea who he really was. To me, he was just Ethan, not the heir to Caldwell Estates, one of the most powerful real estate dynasties stretching from Boston to Miami. He didn't flaunt it. No designer suits, no air of superiority, just a worn leather jacket, an easy grin, and a voice that made promises sound like they could actually be kept. We fell fast. We fell hard. It was the kind of love that felt inevitable, the kind you read about but rarely believe could happen to you. Ethan wasn't like the other men I'd met in the city, the ones who measured your worth in business cards or designer labels. He was kind, grounded, and he made me believe that love could conquer anything, even the brutal walls of the world he came from. The early days were a dream. Weekend trips to Cape Cod, late nights sketching our future together on napkins, whispered promises shared under the stars. It was everything I had ever wanted, everything I had dared to hope for. When Ethan proposed 6 months later, under the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree in the Boston Commons, I said yes without a second thought. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. Love, I thought, was enough. It didn't matter that I didn't come from money, that my family name carried no prestige. It didn't matter that his world was built on generational wealth and silent expectations. I believed that what we had was stronger than all of that, and for a while it was. When I found out I was pregnant, Ethan's joy was blinding. He twirled me around our tiny apartment, laughing with pure wonder, his hands cradling my belly as if already feeling the tiny heartbeats within. "We'll protect them," he whispered against my skin. "No matter what. You, me, and our little family, nothing else matters." For a moment, I let myself believe it. I let myself imagine a life where love would shield us from judgment, where determination could outpace disdain. I ignored the small voice in the back of my mind, the one that whispered about the world we would be up against, the one that wore pearls and diamonds and judged women like me without mercy. But love, no matter how fierce, how pure, is sometimes not enough to withstand the forces that lurk behind closed doors, forces like Eleanor Caldwell, forces that were a mother's smile but wield a heart made of stone. And even as Ethan kissed my forehead and whispered promises of forever, a shadow had already begun to stretch over us, one I was too blinded by hope to see. The first time I met Eleanor Caldwell, it felt like stepping onto a battlefield dressed for a garden party. Ethan had insisted it was just a casual gathering at the Caldwell estate, a chance for me to meet some of his extended family and friends. He had smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Don't be nervous. They're just people." But as we pulled up the winding driveway and the towering stone mansion loomed into view, my heart sank because everything about that place screamed that I didn't belong. Inside, the estate glittered under the weight of old money. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above marble floors, and oil paintings of stern ancestors glared down from gilded frames. Men in tailored suits murmured about stocks and politics, while women draped in silk and diamonds eyed one another with veiled disdain. I clutched Ethan's hand tightly, my pulse hammering in my ears, and tried to smile, but it felt like trying to stay afloat in a storm. And then I saw her. Eleanor Caldwell sat at the center of the grand room like a queen, holding court. A glass of deep red wine rested in her manicured hand, her steel-gray eyes sweeping the room with clinical precision. She was elegant, poised, and utterly terrifying. When her gaze landed on me, it was as if a blade had been drawn silently across my skin. She rose from her chair with the grace of someone used to commanding attention without lifting her voice. Crossing the room slowly, she approached us, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. Every conversation around us seemed to hush, the air thick with expectation. "Ethan," she said warmly, kissing his cheek with a familiarity that spoke volumes. Then, turning to me, she offered her hand, a smile curving her lips but not reaching her eyes. "And you must be Sophia." I took her hand, and despite my best effort to hide it, I flinched slightly at the chill of her touch. "It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Caldwell," I said, forcing my voice steady. Her smile sharpened, a wolf smile hidden behind pearls and politeness. "Daniel tells me you're expecting," she said, her voice as smooth and cold as the marble underfoot. How unexpected! I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The weight of her gaze pinned me in place. Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside me, squeezing my hand, but I could feel the tension radiating from him like heat off asphalt. Eleanor said nothing else to me that night. She didn't have to. Every glance, every slight tilt of her head, every carefully orchestrated silence shouted the truth. I was not welcome here. I was an outsider, a blemish on their carefully curated legacy. The evening dragged on, a blur of forced smiles and veiled barbs, until finally, mercifully, we left. As the car pulled away from the estate, I turned to Ethan, searching his face for reassurance, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. In the days that followed, things began to shift. At first, it was subtle, missed calls, distracted conversations, nights he came home late, smelling faintly of expensive scotch and expensive pressure. He insisted everything was fine, that I was imagining things, but the distance between us grew with each passing day. And always, in the back of my mind, lurked the memory of Eleanor's cold smile, and the sinking certainty that she had set something in motion that night, something I couldn't yet name, but could feel tightening around me like an invisible noose. By the time I felt the first pangs of labor, I'd barely recognized the man who paced nervously beside my hospital bed. His body was there, but his heart, his mind had already begun slipping away, and I was too busy clinging to hope to see it. The night our twins were born, the city of Boston was drenched in rain, the streets slick and glistening under the amber streetlights. Inside the hospital room, the storm outside seemed a distant hum compared to the storm brewing inside me. I gripped Ethan's hand tightly, feeling the fire of each contraction tear through me, but focusing only on the man who was supposed to be my anchor. For a moment, just a fleeting, precious moment, he was there, smiling down at me, tears in his eyes as he whispered, "You're doing amazing, Sophia, just a little more." When our children arrived, one boy, one girl, the world should have stopped in wonder. Ethan held them both, cradling their tiny bodies with trembling hands, a soft, astonished laugh breaking from his lips. "They're perfect," he said, voice thick with emotion. I believed him. I needed to believe him. I clung to that image with everything I had. But even then, even in the glow of that miraculous moment, I could feel it, the invisible wall that had grown between us. It wasn't just exhaustion in his eyes. It was something else. Something final. We brought the babies home to our small apartment 2 days later. The nursery wasn't much, just a corner of the bedroom sectioned off with a thrifted crib and hand-painted stars on the walls. But it was filled with dreams. Dreams I had woven carefully, lovingly, around our little family. Dreams that began unraveling the very next morning. Ethan left early, mumbling something about work, about needing to check in at the office. He didn't kiss me goodbye. He barely looked at me. I stood there, swaying with exhaustion, 2 tiny miracles sleeping behind me, trying to tell myself it was just stress, just pressure, just temporary. Days blurred into nights. Nights blurred into aching, sleepless marathons of feeding, burping, soothing, crying. I barely noticed the growing emptiness until it became impossible to ignore. Ethan's absences grew longer, his excuses thinner, his eyes colder, and then came that morning. He came home early. I heard the door open and close softly. My heart, leapt despite itself, desperate for a sign, a word, anything that might stitch the widening rift between us. I was sitting on the floor by the crib, humming softly to the babies when he entered the room. I looked up, hopeful, and my heart shattered before he even spoke. He couldn't meet my eyes. His shoulders sagged under an invisible weight. His mouth opened and closed, struggling for words, and finally, with a voice so small it barely reached me, he said, "Sophia, we need to talk." I knew. I knew before he even finished. Still, I asked because some cruel part of me needed to hear it aloud. Talk about what? He closed his eyes, breathing out a tremor of regret. "I can't stay. I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore." The room spun. I clutched the side of the crib to steady myself, feeling the world crumble around me. "You can't stay?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "You're leaving your own children?" Ethan flinched like I had struck him, but he didn't take it back. He didn't even try. "My mother was right," he muttered, shame coloring his words. "We don't belong together. You don't fit." Tears streamed down my face, hot and furious and helpless. "So you're just walking away?" I choked out. "Just like that?" He didn't answer. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he didn't dare. Without another word, he turned and walked away, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that echoed through the hollow chambers of my soul. I stood there, frozen, listening to the babies stir, their tiny whimpers piercing the silence, and it hit me like a physical blow. I was alone, utterly, completely alone, and no amount of love, no amount of promises once made under golden leaves and autumn skies could change that now. The days that followed were not days at all. They were endless, shapeless voids, stitched together by exhaustion, sorrow, and the mechanical demands of survival. I moved through them like a ghost, caring for my newborns because I had no other choice, because their tiny faces were the only tether keeping me from sinking entirely into the dark. The apartment felt unbearably silent without Ethan's presence, though in truth he had been slipping away long before the door finally closed behind him. Every creak of the floorboards, every passing car outside, every knock at the door made my heart lurch with desperate hope. But it was never him. It never would be again. At night, when the babies finally drifted into restless sleep, I would sit on the cold hardwood floor, staring at the thin crack under the door where light from the hallway spilled into the room, and I would cry. Silent, shattering sobs that ripped through my chest until there was nothing left inside but a hollow ache. I cried for the life we were supposed to have, for the promises broken so easily, for the love I had foolishly believed could conquer everything. I stopped answering my phone. Friends, coworkers, acquaintances, they all called, worried, offering help I didn't know how to accept. What could I say? That I had been abandoned like discarded furniture? That I was now a mother of two, alone, without a job, without family close by, without a clue how I would survive the next week, let alone the next year? I couldn't even bring myself to speak the words out loud, because saying them would make them real. The walls of the apartment seemed to close in tighter with each passing day. Bills piled up on the counter unopened. The fridge grew emptier. The landlord's reminders about the rent became colder, more insistent. Meanwhile, diapers, formula, baby wipes, all disappeared with frightening speed. I had saved a little, but not enough, never enough. I thought of calling Ethan once. Just once. My hand even hovered over the phone. But then I saw the sleeping faces of my children, so peaceful, so trusting, and I realized that whatever strength I had left, it had to be for them. Not for a man who had turned his back on us the moment life demanded more than pretty words and easy affection. Still, some nights, the loneliness was unbearable. I would sit by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, feeling the vast, uncaring world pulse just beyond reach. Boston's city lights glittered in the distance, vibrant and alive, and I had never felt so isolated. There were moments I wondered if anyone would notice if we simply disappeared, if anyone would care. One particularly cold night, when the twins had finally fallen asleep, I found myself kneeling beside the crib, my hands trembling as I adjusted their blankets. I whispered promises to them in the dark. Promises I wasn't sure I could keep. I don't know how, I said softly, tears blurring my vision, but I will find a way. I have to. That night, something shifted inside me. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't immediate, but it was there. A tiny, stubborn ember in the wreckage. A flicker of understanding that no one was coming to save me. And if I wanted to survive, if I wanted my children to have even a chance, I had to be stronger than the grief trying to drown me. I had to become something else, someone else. The sun rose the next morning, pale and hesitant over the frozen rooftops, and for the first time since Ethan left, I didn't crumble when I opened my eyes. I moved through the small apartment with deliberate steps, feeding the babies, changing them, rocking them back to sleep. I brewed a pot of cheap coffee, ignoring the hollow ache in my stomach. And then I sat at the kitchen table with my battered laptop, staring at a blank screen, fingers hovering uncertainly over the keys. It was time to try, to rebuild, to crawl out of the wreckage he had left behind, no matter how impossible it felt. Because the truth was cruel but simple. No one else was coming. The first time I sat down to rebuild my life, it wasn't with some grand plan or soaring ambition. It was pure necessity, raw survival. I needed to find a way to provide for my children, and no one was going to offer it to me. I sent out resume after resume, desperate for any job that could accommodate the erratic needs of 2 newborns. But reality slammed into me harder than any rejection letter. No one wanted to hire a woman who had just given birth to twins, who couldn't stay late, who couldn't work weekends, who couldn't guarantee she'd be available at a moment's notice. Some recruiters didn't even pretend to hide their disdain. Others simply stopped responding. The money dwindled, faster than I expected, faster than I could control. I rationed formula, skipped meals, sold off what few valuables I had left. I rocked my babies at night, feeling the gnawing hunger clawing at my own stomach, whispering to myself that tomorrow would be better. It had to be. One evening, after another string of rejection emails, I sat at the cracked kitchen table, my head in my hands, feeling the walls press closer than ever. My babies lay asleep nearby, dressed in the tiny outfits I had sewn for them when I couldn't afford anything else. Clothes made from leftover fabric scraps, stitched together by trembling fingers. I looked at them, their tiny chests rising and falling in innocent trust, and an idea, wild and ridiculous and impossible, sparked somewhere in the wreckage of my mind. If no one would hire me, I would hire myself. It sounded absurd. I wasn't a fashion designer. I didn't have investors. I didn't have a team. All I had was an old second-hand sewing machine borrowed from the elderly neighbor downstairs, a handful of fabric, and the stubborn belief that maybe, just maybe, I could create something better than the overpriced, uncomfortable baby clothes lining the shelves of department stores. I called it Bright Nest, a place where little ones could be wrapped not just in fabric, but in hope, in resilience, in the love that had survived everything. The first pieces were simple, stretchy leggings, soft onesies, cozy hats, all made during stolen moments between feedings and diaper changes. I photographed them as best I could, using my battered phone and a bedsheet for a backdrop. I built a small, clumsy website late at night while the twins slept beside me, their breaths steady and rhythmic, the only music in my new world. I emailed bloggers, influencers, parenting groups. Most never replied. A few sent polite rejections. One woman placed a tiny order, a single onesie, but canceled it the next day without explanation. Every setback felt personal, like the universe laughing at my foolishness. Doubt seeped in, slow and corrosive. Was I wasting time that could be better spent begging for a job? Any job? Was I foolish to think I could build something when everything else had crumbled so easily? One night, after another fruitless day, I curled up beside the crib, clutching one of the little outfits I had made. Tears slid down my face, hot and bitter. But somewhere in the midst of that despair, I looked at my baby sleeping peacefully, dressed in clothes crafted by my own broken hands, and something inside me refused to quit. Maybe the world didn't care. Maybe success would never come. But these two little souls, they deserved a mother who tried. So I tried. I refined my designs. I took better photos. I reworked the website. I stayed up until dawn stitching and sewing and learning, pushing through the exhaustion that blurred my vision. For weeks, there was nothing. No orders. No hope. And then, one morning, a notification blinked across my cracked phone screen. Order received. One bright Nest Soft onesie. It was a small order. Tiny. Insignificant by any real measure. But to me, it was everything. The first order gave me hope. But hope alone didn't pay for diapers or rent. I kept working, pouring every ounce of energy into Bright Nest, even when the days bled into nights and the nights into exhausted mornings. I juggled everything. Feedings, diaper changes, endless sewing, and hand packing every tiny package that left my apartment. Each sale was a small victory, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, I was clawing my way out of the pit that had swallowed me whole. But it was slow, so painfully slow. Some weeks I would only get 1 or 2 orders, barely enough to cover a bag of formula, and there were nights I still cried quietly into my pillow, wondering if I was chasing a dream that would never grow beyond the walls of our crumbling apartment. Then, one evening, everything changed. I had sent a sample package to a parenting influencer, a woman with hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram, without expecting anything. I had almost forgotten about it entirely, until my phone buzzed with a notification that made my heart stop. She had posted about Bright Nest. A simple photo, her smiling baby girl, wrapped in one of my handmade onesies, the caption gushing about the quality, the softness, the love stitched into every seam. She called Bright Nest a hidden gem for moms who want their babies wrapped in comfort and care. Within minutes, my inbox exploded. Messages from mothers flooded in, asking about sizes, colors, custom orders. My tiny website, which had limped along in quiet obscurity, suddenly crashed from the surge of traffic. I stared at the error screen, blinking, my brain struggling to catch up, and then I laughed a wild, disbelieving laugh that startled the twins awake. Orders poured in faster than I could process them. 10, 20, 100. I lost count. I called my elderly neighbor downstairs, begging for her help packing shipments. I hand-wrote thank you notes at 2 in the morning, bleary-eyed but exhilarated. The following days were a whirlwind. I sourced more fabric, hired a local seamstress part-time, expanded my little operation from a corner of my living room to a cramped but functional workspace 2 blocks away. Bright Nest was no longer just an idea, it was becoming real, tangible, alive. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I was alive too. Every smile from a satisfied customer, every photo of a happy baby wearing my designs, was a stitch repairing the pieces of my broken heart. Every sale was a reminder that I was more than what Ethan had left behind. I was building something beautiful from the ruins. 6 months after that first viral post, Bright Nest wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. We had regular customers, glowing reviews, and features in 2 local parenting magazines. I hired 2 more seamstresses, moved into a small but bright storefront on the edge of Boston's South End, and began dreaming even bigger. One night, as I sat on the worn couch in our new, slightly less cramped apartment, I watched my twins giggling on the carpet, wearing matching outfits I'd sewn myself. The city lights flickered beyond the window, and for once, they didn't feel so distant they felt like they were shining just for us. I realized, in that moment, that I had done it. Not because someone had rescued me, not because a man had come back to fix what he broke, but because I refused to let the darkness win, because I had fought inch by inch, stitch by stitch, for a life worthy of my children and of myself. And as I looked at their sleepy smiles, their tiny hands reaching for me, I knew this was only the beginning. It happened on an ordinary Sunday morning, the kind of day that no longer carried the weight of sadness, but instead hummed with quiet joy. I had taken the twins to Charles River Esplanade, a place where the grass was lush and the water sparkled under the spring sun. The laughter of my children filled the air as they chased after bubbles, their little hands reaching for the sky. And for once, I allowed myself to simply breathe, to exist without fear. That's when I felt it, a gaze heavy and hesitant, resting on me from across the park. I turned slowly, and there he was, Ethan. Time had not been kind to him. His face, once youthful and full of effortless charm, was lined and hollow. His shoulders sagged under the weight of choices he could no longer outrun. He stood there for a moment, unsure, like a man on the wrong side of a locked door. Our eyes met. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I simply watched him, calm, detached, feeling nothing but a distant curiosity, the way one might observe an old photograph faded with time. He took a few hesitant steps forward, his hands twisting nervously at his sides. "Sophia," he said, his voice cracked and soft, barely carrying over the breeze. I saw you on TV." I tilted my head slightly, offering nothing more than a polite, expectant silence. He swallowed hard, looking down at the ground like a boy caught in a lie. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. Not because I expect you to forgive me, but because I need you to know. I regret everything." For a moment, the world seemed to hush around us, the river, the laughter, the wind, all pausing as if to listen. I let the silence stretch, feeling the weight of it settle around us. And then I said, very softly, "Are you done?" He looked up, startled by the steadiness in my voice. Perhaps he had expected tears. Perhaps he had expected anger. But there was nothing left for him to hurt. I had already rebuilt myself from the ashes he left behind. I smiled, a quiet, liberated smile, and added, "Because I don't need your regret, Ethan. I don't need your love or your apology." He opened his mouth to speak, but I shook my head gently. "I've built a life," I continued, "a life that doesn't have room for ghosts." His face crumpled then, the reality of it sinking in deeper than any words I could have spoken. I turned back toward my children, who were now waving eagerly at me from across the grass, their laughter like a melody no betrayal could touch. Without another word, I walked away. And Ethan, he stayed standing there, rooted to the spot, a man who had traded his soul for a world that never loved him back. I had realized it far, far too late. Ethan didn't go home right away. Maybe he didn't know where home was anymore. Eventually, though, his steps dragged him back to the only place he had left, the Caldwell estate. The grand mansion loomed against the fading light, its towering columns and manicured gardens standing just as they always had. But somehow it looked smaller now, emptier, as if it too had grown tired of pretending. Inside, the house was bathed in the sterile glow of crystal chandeliers, their cold light bouncing off marble floors and priceless art. The scent of oak and old money lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. Eleanor Caldwell sat in her favorite armchair by the fireplace, a glass of red wine swirling lazily in her hand. She didn't look up as Ethan entered. She didn't have to. She knew. "So," she said, her voice smooth and detached, "did you finally realize the woman you abandoned wasn't waiting around for you?" Her words struck like a slap, but Ethan didn't react. He simply stood there, his hands hanging uselessly by his sides, the hollowness in his chest threatening to consume him. "You say that like you're proud," he said quietly. Eleanor finally looked up then, her steely eyes sharp and unyielding. "I am proud," she said. "I saved you from a mistake that would have cost you everything." Ethan let out a bitter laugh, dry, humorless, echoing off the empty walls. "Everything," he repeated. "You think this." He gestured around the cavernous, silent room. "This is everything?" Eleanor's smile didn't falter. "You have your place, Ethan. Your legacy." "My legacy," he whispered, the words tasting like ash. "All I have is this empty shell. A title, a fortune, a house that feels more like a mausoleum than a home." Eleanor set her glass down with a sharp clink. "Don't be dramatic. You have what matters. No, Ethan said, his voice steady now. I had what mattered, and I let it slip through my fingers because I was too much of a coward to stand up to you. The room crackled with the tension of things long left unsaid. Eleanor rose to her feet, her expression tightening. So what now? You want to blame me for your weakness? I want to leave, Ethan said simply. I don't want any of this. Not the name, not the fortune, not the emptiness. Eleanor's mouth opened, a retort forming on her tongue. But for the first time, she found no words. Ethan turned without waiting for her response. His footsteps echoed through the grand halls as he made his way to the door, passing the portraits of ancestors who had sacrificed everything for power and lost themselves along the way. He stepped outside into the cold night air, feeling the weight of the mansion fall away behind him. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know who he would become. But he knew one thing: he couldn't stay here, drowning in the consequences of choices he could no longer justify. Inside, Eleanor sat alone, the fire crackling weakly against the vast, frozen silence. She had won, and yet there was no one left to celebrate with. No son, no grandchildren, no family, just the ticking of the grandfather clock and the bitter taste of a victory that had cost her everything. Morning sunlight spilled through the windows of our new home, painting everything in soft gold. The laughter of my children echoed down the hallway, blending with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. I sat at the dining table, my laptop open in front of me, scrolling through new contracts and customer messages for Bright Nest, the little brand that had once been stitched together from nothing but desperation and a mother's love. I paused for a moment, letting it sink in, letting the quiet joy fill me. There was no fear here, no emptiness, no walls closing in, just warmth and freedom. The twins dashed into the room, their tiny feet thumping against the hardwood floors, each proudly wearing one of my newest designs. I scooped them up into my arms, spinning them around until we collapsed onto the couch in a pile of giggles and tangled limbs. Their smiles lit up everything. This was success. This was happiness. Not the hollow kind measured by bank accounts or last names or the approval of those who had long since forfeited their right to matter, but the kind built slowly, carefully, stitch by stitch, heart by heart. Later that afternoon, as we strolled through a busy shopping center, I heard someone call my name. I turned to see a young woman, her arms full of baby clothes, her face bright with recognition. "You're Sophia Bennett, right?" she said, breathless with excitement. "The founder of Bright Nest?" I blinked, surprised, but nodded with a small smile. "Oh my God, I'm such a huge fan," she gushed. "Your story, it's so inspiring. You've shown so many of us that it's possible to rebuild, to start over, even when it feels impossible." I laughed softly, touched by her words. "I just did what I had to do," I said. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself." That night, after the twins had bathed and eaten and drifted off to sleep, I sat beside their beds, telling them a bedtime story, not about princes or castles, but about a woman who had once been broken, and how she had rebuilt herself stronger than ever. My daughter, her voice thick with sleep, asked Mommy, did she live happily ever after? I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "She did," I whispered, "because she made her own happiness." As I turned off the lights and stepped into the hallway, I paused at the doorway, looking back at the two small figures nestled safely in their beds. They were my why, my how, my everything. And no man, no betrayal, no legacy of cold privilege could ever take that away from me. Far away, in a mansion filled with echoes and regrets, Ethan Caldwell was grappling with the choices he had made and the life he had lost. But here, in this home built not with money, but with courage, there was only love. This was not a story about revenge, or regret, or even loss. It was a story about resilience, about choosing to rise again and again, even when the world tries to break you. It was my story, and it was just the beginning.